O'clock, and this is the Metropolitan Council meeting, February 28th, 2024. I'm Charlie Zelli, Chair. It's my honor to start the meeting. Before we approve the agenda, I just want to acknowledge that for many Minnesotans, today has been a really poignant day. We've had certainly media attention, live radio, live TV coverage of the services in Burnsville associated with the police officers and the firefighter who lost their lives in service to the public. Why is that important to us? Well, you know, Met Council is a public and a service agency ourselves, and we have Metro Transit officers, police department, and community service officers, trip agents, TCIP agents, and frankly, operators and technicians who are in the front line of facing a difficult world and in protection of themselves, the public, and us. So I just think it is important to acknowledge that and to ensure that we are giving at least a, not just a recognition, but that we kind of hold that spirit and those that are there doing that service in our hearts. So if I can just take 30 seconds where we say nothing and have a moment of silence in contemplation of that. Thank you. And thank you for joining us today. We have a rich agenda of business items and then a information report on the forecast of population. So it's something I always look forward to. But unless I hear an objection, I will rule the agenda approved. But we now have minutes from the council meeting on February 14th that was sent out in advance. And unless there's corrections, additions, or questions, I would entertain a motion and a second for approval.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those minutes are approved. We now have an opportunity for a public address to the council where we provide a time for up to 3 minutes for a limited number of people. And we have, I see 5 people who have signed up and we're looking forward to hearing those 5 people. So first up, and you can come introduce yourself and come to the microphone and we'll keep time. And that is, first up is Hannah Gary. Is Hannah Gary here? Speaking on behalf of Hannah Gary. All right. Welcome. And you can state your name for the record and proceed.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Rajan Nair. I'm speaking on behalf of Hannah Gary. Hannah Gary is a planning analyst in community development. I'm sharing my experience today with the hopes that the council members and executive leadership recognize that there are people behind the contract decisions that are made. When you are arguing against increased PTO, you are arguing against people being able to take care of themselves. When you are arguing against health insurance for interns, you are arguing in favor of taking advantage of someone and leaving them vulnerable to serious financial consequences so you can get cheaper labor. These decisions have real negative consequences on the people who make this organization run. At the beginning of 2020, before COVID, I had to take FMLA because of a severe illness. During this very difficult time, I was told to just use the leave that I did not have. I was pushed to believe I was asking for too much and that what I was going through was not real. My doctors wrote several letters explaining that I was not able to work. The pressure not to use my benefits continued, and this was deeply hurtful. I barely had the capacity to get through the day, much less fight, to be treated with basic respect. It took several months of fighting to be able to use the benefits promised to me in my union contract. There were several months of fighting with an employer who touted benefits as the main reason to work at the council. Several months of being belittled in an incredibly vulnerable time. I now save as much PTO as I can in case I get sick again. I don't take much needed days off because I don't know when another round of my illness will be a fight. I recently had a friend ask about working at the council and if I would recommend it. Right now, my answer is no. New employees have to choose between working sick or getting paid. The organization is fighting against fair and transparent pay. Colleagues don't feel safe in council meetings because of things that have been said. We're hiring interns for entry-level positions and refusing them benefits. Teams are short-staffed and consequently overworked, exacerbating conditions for burnout. So no, right now I would not recommend working at the council. I hope everyone here today understands the risks that the staff are taking by sharing their stories. There is a fear of retaliation that is not taken lightly. Many staff who are staying at the council are not staying because of how we are treated. We are staying despite it, but that won't last forever. Once again, I hope hearing stories from staff tonight brings an understanding that these requests aren't just a numbers decision. These are choices about people being able to take care of themselves and take care of their families. If the organization continues to show that we as a staff are not valued, we will continue to have staff leave for organizations that value them as people. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we have signed up Hillary Lovelace.
Hello all, my name is Hillary Lovelace. I'm a planning analyst here at the Metropolitan Council. On the same day that I presented to Committee of the Whole last week, I also put in my notice at the Metropolitan Council. I'm taking another job. Part of the reason for that is I've been consistently put in situations where I'm in charge of other staff and I have not been named or compensated for it. Another reason why I'm no longer continuing my employment at the council is my experience with applying for FMLA, both when I had a brain injury, also when I had an illness, and also when I was pregnant and gave birth to my daughter. All three times I was met with messages from management that I should have applied for FMLA in a different way, even if I was following instructions that I found clearly posted on the website. It was often a great struggle in order to access salary continuance. And when I didn't understand the forms after a brain injury, I was told that I should have contacted them sooner if I knew I was expecting. There was no assistance when I asked for help in filling out the forms on behalf of management. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Heidi Schallberg.
Good afternoon, Chair and Council members. My name is Heidi Schallberg, and I live in District 7. I also work as a planning analyst in MTS, and I'm an AFSCME member, which is a tongue twister. As you know, we currently have an internal campaign here at the Council. We're on this together. But frankly, it doesn't really feel like that right now. Not based on what I'm hearing from my colleagues on our negotiations team. Actions need to back up those words for the words to be meaningful. And it's not just internal campaigns. The Council also needs to walk the walk on its policy language. Right now, staff are working on the next regional development guide and system policy plans. And in those, we have a draft goal that our region's residents live healthy and rewarding lives with a sense of dignity and well-being. The Council should support all these statements by leading as an employer with fair contracts that strongly support employee health and well-being. Part of this means providing sufficient paid time off. However, the Council is at the bottom of larger public agencies for our level of paid time off. Our new staff get paid time off that is 47% less than other large public sector employers in the area, including the state. And even for more tenured staff at the Council, our paid time off still lags behind other public agencies. Our new staff accrue paid time off very slowly at just 5 hours per pay period over the year, which is really hard when you get sick before you have much time built up. Meanwhile, other staff at the Council are given their paid leave in one block, so they don't have to wait for the time to build up. So when they have enough, when they get sick or their families get sick. We should all get paid time off in a lump sum each year, especially considering we don't have separate sick leave. Insufficient paid time off can mean spending less time with family and friends. It also means people are coming to work sick, whether it's remote or on-site. This can inhibit our ability to fully recover from illness and potentially spreads illness to other employees when on-site. It ultimately means our staff have less support from the council in truly living healthy and rewarding lives. I also want to add that we deserve basic respect from leadership. My colleagues on our union negotiations team are being treated with flagrant disrespect during negotiation meetings, including eye-rolling from council leadership when my union representatives are speaking. I ask for your supportive staff by conveying to leadership in these negotiations that the council should be walking the walk on what our policies and campaigns state about health, well-being, and respect. If we're truly on this together, staff deserve fair and competitive contracts from a respectful process. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Brandon Whitted. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Brandon, it's Whited. I'm a data scientist with MTS, and I would like to share my story about coming to the Metropolitan Council. I came to Metropolitan Council from a global agriculture firm. I wanted to serve my local community was the motivation behind my move. I knew the move to public service would mean less compensation. However, on arrival, I tried to negotiate for wages, and I tried to negotiate for a vacation package that was competitive with peers of my age. When negotiating for wages, the Metropolitan Council told me they didn't have much room to move. However, they could offer me the performance zone. I didn't know what the performance zone was, but it's a public service organization, so I assumed it was the best that they could do for me. They offered, when talking about vacations, they said they're not allowed to bargain for a vacation. Then, shortly after I was hired, I learned what the performance zone meant. It meant that smaller raises for folks that were in it compared to folks that were not, strangely enough. For vacation, I learned that they could have negotiated for vacation. I simply had to call it service credit instead. On both accounts, I felt deceived, I felt cheated, and I felt like the council had acted without integrity. Later on, and I accepted anywho in service of the public. Later on, he ended up applying for, interviewed, and was chosen for a role in a different division within the council. This time I understood the lingo, understood how the council worked, and I was prepared to bargain. But wouldn't you know it, they told me that internal candidates applying for these roles are not allowed to bargain. Only the external competition for these roles would be allowed to had they been chosen. Despite that, I pushed for the vacation that I didn't get the first time around because of the deception involved. But they told me that you can only bargain for that when you first join the council. So again, I felt deceived, I felt cheated, and I felt like the council had acted without integrity. And now I'm on the AFSCME bargaining team. And management is coming to the table and offering disrespectfully low wage increases. They're ignoring the inflation that we've all suffered over the last few years. They're not responding to data requests in a timely manner. They're recharacterizing the performance zone as a benefit instead of a detriment. And they're refusing to take labor relations seriously. So when you're listening to these stories here today of the lack of the deception, the mistreatment, general lack of integrity, I plead to ask yourselves, if this is how the Met Council treats its own, how can the community expect it to be treated any differently?
Thank you. And now our last speaker, Jed Hansen.
Chair Zelli and council members, my name is Jed Hansen. I'm a member of the AFSCME negotiating team, and I am a transportation planner working on the Imagine 2050 plans. I'm also a resident of District 7. Through those plans, the council has set a value. We value those in our region who inspire and motivate others for positive change. And like my colleague Heidi had mentioned, that value is expressed through goals like all our region's residents live healthy and rewarding lives with a sense of dignity and well-being. I struggle with these statements when I see how the Met Council as an employer treats its interns. We have a large internship program that mostly replaces entry-level benefited union jobs at big cost savings to the council. because we don't provide them benefits like health insurance. I was employed as an intern for 14 months before being hired permanently. During that time, I aged off my parents' health insurance, which I was lucky enough to have in the first place. I ran into the curious circumstance where the council paid me a little too much to qualify for Minnesota Care, but not enough to afford a plan from my university or off the health insurance exchanges. I had to watch my hours to keep my income low enough to qualify for a COVID-19 era temporary expansion of one of those healthcare programs. If I wasn't lucky like that, I wouldn't have stayed at the council today, patiently waiting for that permanent hire that took months, because I have health conditions I cannot manage without insurance. I was appalled when I sat across the table from the labor relations team and they acted like this was a non-issue. I was told the interns have already had some benefit increases like earned sick and safe time. Our interns only receive that, which is 3 days of sick leave a year, annual pension match, and once they've been around for a while, some paid holidays. That's not at the employer's benevolence. Those are benefits that are required of public employers in state law. When we don't cover our interns, we limit those learning opportunities to those with enough privilege to afford the sacrifice. I encourage the council to do the right thing and make our interns whole, recognizing the high quality work they do. These are grown adults of all ages with bills to pay, families to support, and healthcare needs. Thank you, and I believe you also had one more person signed up, Renee Pira-Webb.
Thank you. Was there somebody who signed up? I just have these. Yeah, come forward then. Thank you.
Chair Zelli, council members, I'm Renee Pereira-Webb. I am an employee of 5 years and have been a 26-year resident of District 16. And I'm here to talk about what I've seen since I've been here. And I think the hardest part for me is I was so excited 5 years ago when I came to work here. I'd been working for Dakota County for over 14 years, and it was a breath of fresh air. I loved it. And over the last year and a half, that's been taken from many of us. We've recently lost 4 people over in CD that are taking a combined plus of 45 years knowledge with them. That is going to make it very difficult to complete some of the things that we need to do when we're here. The dedicated employees here today, they don't want to be here. They feel they have to be, because it's time for the council to see and hear what's going on. Council members, we're asking you to listen to what they've told you now and hear what's happening to the dedicated employees that are responsible for completing the work of the Met Council. During negotiations, we've asked for little more than respect, a positive and supportive work environment, and a livable wage. But we've been met by opposition and apathy by your labor relations staff. Our wages and benefits are no longer competitive, and our work culture has become one of stress, worry, and lack of support. Managers have been hired that simply do not have the knowledge or skills to support their teams. This has led to numerous staff leaving, not because they don't like their jobs, but because they're not supported. They're not compensated for their knowledge, skills, and talents they exhibit every day at mostly above average ratings on performance reviews. We know this because we have incredible data researchers here. We also know that we're second worst in PTO. I don't want to be second worst of anything. I hope you don't either. Many new employees are being hired at or within the performance zone, as our wage scale is simply too low, and our performance zone is no way an incentive to stay. The Met Council has been fighting to increase the pay cap on the wage structure to entice new applicants, but will do nothing to retain the people we currently have. I've been a top performer since I started here. It's just how I was raised. You achieve the best. I did it again this year, and I will be lucky if I get a 1.5% for being almost 5, which is the top that you can get here. 0.5 away from it, 1.5%. But no one's really sure if that's the number because the way that they do the performance scale is so convoluted and not transparent that we're kind of still guessing on that. We never really know. We also have asked to add stillbirth to paid parental leave. This is something that the state contract did this year. We have been met with a resounding no from your labor relations staff, and I'm going to appeal to all of you. If you lost a child and you had to bury a child, is 3 days enough to be expected to come back to work? Council members, You may have been able to say, claim ignorance, that you didn't know what was going on, and we understand that. But as of today, that's not the case. We're asking for your actions and for your help, and we'll know that if that doesn't happen, it's not from ignorance, but from indifference. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're marching forward with the consent business items. And if there's not an interest in taking any particular item out, I would entertain a motion and a second for approval of the consent business agenda.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the consent business agenda is approved. We're on to our reports of standing committees. There are no reports from Community Development, no reports for the Environmental Committee. There is from the Management Committee. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to bring this item before all of you for your consideration tonight. This is business item 2024-60, and it is a same week item. The Metropolitan Council and the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU Local 1005, have reached a settlement and ratification of a new collective bargaining agreement. ATU represents approximately 2,000 employees who work for Metro Transit, including bus and train operators, technicians, maintenance personnel, and administrative staff. After several months of negotiations in 2023, covering over 130 bargaining proposals, the parties reached out to the state's Labor Mediation Service on January 16th and February 5th of this year, continued to work on reaching tentative agreements. All three teams, the union, the council, and the mediators, worked together to finalize a final offer and proposal that was ratified by ATU membership on February 19th of this year. Highlights of the new agreement include a 3-year contract effective August 1st, 2023 through July 31st, 2026, a compensation package that includes a 5.5 general wage increase in year 1, 4.5 general wage increase in year 2, and 3.0 general increase in the 3rd year of the contract. Market adjustments for certain mechanical technical positions that are experiencing recruitment challenges to ensure we remain competitive and able to staff a growing transit system were included, and increased flexibility in bus operator scheduling to meet changing service needs, as well as increased flexibility in time off usage for all ATU staff. I also want to add that there was also bereavement leave that was added to the contract. As the cost of the agreement, the cost of the agreement was reviewed by finance and was negotiated within the economic parameters established by the council. And we, as we do with all negotiations at the management committee level. This item was reviewed and approved by the management committee today, February 28th, 2024. And before I make the final motion, Mr. Chair, I do want to thank Marcy and our negotiations team for working very hard to get to this agreement. They've done a wonderful job, and we're very grateful for that. And also I want to thank ATU President Dave Stiggers and the ATU leaders for coming to the table. It was really important to see everybody really trying to hammer this out. There's so much at stake on both sides of this issue, and we use the word partnership, I think, along the way. Feeling pretty good about this. So just thank you to everybody who put a lot of effort and time into getting us where we are today. So with that, Mr. Chair, the Management Committee moves approval to authorize the Regional Administrator to enter into a labor agreement with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU Local 1005, effective August 1st, 2023 through July 31st, 2026.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Go ahead, Councilmember Morales.
The only comment I got, this is a great agreement and everything, but this contract expired August of last year. What are we going to do moving forward to get this contract, to get an agreement before August? Because when you actually look at the big picture now, the council has to go back and back pay multiple months, and that's a huge financial burden. And then if we would have just came to an agreement back then and started timely negotiations, and we wouldn't have to deal with anything like that.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
I'll be brief. Councilmember Morales, I really appreciate your point. Trust that before this is up, we will start the process again and we will, hopefully, both sides will come together in earnest. And again, just appreciating the new leadership that stepped forward with ATU. So the goal is always to get where we need to be, and we'll continue to appreciate your comments and work towards that goal.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? I just joined Councilmember Johnson in thanking the bargaining group, both ATU and our management team. This is really a great contract. It's 3 years. There's some back pay element that's just sadly been a tradition, so for whatever reason, that's worth looking at. But I think we're in a good place, and honestly, retaining and recruiting employees is maybe our #1 issue with everything else we're facing. So it's great news.
And Mr. Chair, just to that point, I mentioned it in the overview, but there were key issues in here that were agreed upon that will really help us. That flexibility piece and other pieces too, to retain but also recruit new folks. And we know that with that pipeline of projects that we've got coming up, we're going to need them here. So again, I'm really hoping that with our unions, we can continue to work in partnership as best as we can. And tonight, I'm really thrilled that we've got this one here to vote on tonight.
Great. Anything else? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion carried. On to transportation. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2024-47 regarding approval of a contract to upgrade the regional fare collection system. This major fare collection system upgrade will include adding open payments, account-based passes, fare capping, new fare inspection equipment, cloud server, and other major improvements to take advantage of technology improvements that are now available to the council for transit customers to purchase regional transit fares. Cubic fare collection system will retain much of the hardware infrastructure purchased and installed over the past 20 years, reducing technical schedule and transition risks. Analysis through an independent cost estimate found the upgrade proposal to be competitive with an estimated 30% cost savings over an average system replacement of the same size. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute sole source contract 24P004 with Cubic Transportation Systems to upgrade technology and devices, including ticket vending machines, rail smart car validators, point-of-sale systems, as well as handheld inspection devices, new technology smart cards, and spare parts for a regional fare collection system in an amount not to exceed $37.7 million.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a really significant upgrade to our system and definitely needed to align with technology like we use today, like, tap to pay, whether it's with your card or your phone or some of those things that we're all getting used to in our normal shopping experiences and will just make transit overall more accessible to people. So thank you so much for your support of this.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carried. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2025-50, same week, is to adopt the Bus and Light Rail Agency Safety Plans. The Metropolitan Council last approved the agency safety plans in March of 2023 as part of the required annual update. The agency safety plans are coming back before you now because federal rules require the Board of Directors, or in this case, the Metropolitan Council, to approve any revisions to the agency safety plans after the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee has approved the plan. The Joint Labor Management Safety Committee is a committee required by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. The Joint Labor Management Committee approved this plan on February 22nd, 2024, after reviewing both plans. Metro Transit and ATU formed the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee on July 31st, 2022, as required by law. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt Revision 6 of the Bus Transportation Agency Plan and the Light Rail Transportation Agency Safety Plan for Metro Transit as required by 49 CFR Part 673.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to thank the members of the Joint Labor Management Safety Committee. That as, for refresh your memory, it's a mixture of people from Metro Transit and from ATU who come to the table and work together on these agency safety plans. I really cannot thank all of the participants, both from Metro Transit and ATU, for their active work on this. Not only do we have a plan that makes sense and is right-sized for our agencies, but it's something that they jointly agreed to, which is really a great move forward.
And I would echo congratulations on this. If you all remember a year ago, it wasn't coming along as easily. And not to say it's easy, but we are now making improvements in terms of timeliness. And Andrew, I see you there. Congratulations. Nice work. Any other comments? All right, then we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carried. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2025-5, named same week, is the equivalent action for MTS to adopt their agency safety plan. The Metropolitan Council last approved the agency safety plans in July of 2022, and this is coming back before you because federal rules require the Metropolitan Council, as a board of directors, to approve any revisions to the agency safety plan. Changes within this proposed revision include updates to the safety department structure and annual goals as required by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council adopt Revision 3 of the MTS Bus Transportation Agency Safety Plan as required by 49 CFR Part 673.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This time I want to thank our contracted partners because we did work with, if you look at the contracted partners, some of them provide regular route service, Metro Mobility, all of those different things. And it was a really collaborative effort with those groups as well as MTS, and that has made this happen. And I also, now that we're to the second one, I want to thank Andrew Brody, who has done an outstanding job and really taken this to a new level. So I just want to recognize him and appreciate all the hard work that he's done to get us to this point.
Okay. Any more discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion carried. Thank you, all committees. There are no joint reports. There is one other item under other business, business item 2024-61, the appointment to District D of Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. This is an open seat, and it is my recommendation to appoint David Yax to the impasse for District D. And especially want to thank our wonderful council members, Sue Vento and Tyrone Carter, who served on the interview and the committee to narrow down the candidates. And I know that sometimes these are hard decisions. We get interesting and good people to apply. But you made the recommendation to me, which is why I'm bringing this recommendation to the full council. They're the most qualified and the most motivated. So with that, the proposal action is for the Metropolitan Council to appoint David Yax to the impasse District D to fill a vacant commissioner seat created by the redistricting process. The term will run until the first Monday in January 2027. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you so much. Any discussion? Hearing none?
No.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Councilmember Bento.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Emmett, it's David Yake, correct?
Yakes?
Yakes. Councilmember Bento, yep. Okay, David Yake.
Oh, Yake.
Yake.
I added an
And-
S somehow. There is an S here. Okay,
Yeah.
but it's not run.
And
It's
we had
pronounced
two
Yake.
excellent candidates,
Yeah.
so both of them could have easily stepped in and done a great job. David brings a unique background, and we're really excited about having him join the impasse team. Councilmember Carter, thank you. You are a great colleague to interview with. You bring a lot of skill, as you know, with all that HR background, and you're very, very wise in your guidance and you put up with me, so that's, extra special kudos. I also want to thank Emmett, because Emmett always gets us organized and gets us where we need to go. And I want to do an extra special shout out to Michael's son. We spent a lot of time trying to recruit for this vacancy. And when we figured out that Michael had that great connection to this district, we went to him and he helped. So our rock star on this appointment is Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. Takes the whole village. All right. With that, we'll vote on a motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion carries and that action is approved. So that represents our business items. We have, as I mentioned, a important information item, preliminary local forecast to 2050, and the one and only Todd Graham is here to walk us through it. And I said it was population, but it's so much more. And I know we'll have a lot of curiosity here. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, well, I'm Todd Graham. I'm Principal Forecaster and Economist with Research Office in Community Development Division. And one of Research's main projects this year is the major update of local forecasts. And when I say major update, we will be effectively wiping away the forecasts that we've used during 2015 through 2023 and replacing it with an entirely replaced new forecast set, sort of a blank slate. In January, we published our first preliminary results, and I'll emphasize the word preliminary, and that's what I've brought to present to you today. Does this work? There we go. So items 1 and 2 on this outline are material presented to you in last April, so that'll be a recap. We'll go through that quickly. The middle part of this presentation will be a discussion of the local forecast model and process and the first preliminary results. And I'll end item 5 here with discussion of how we roll this out, our interaction with local governments and other partners, and next steps. The local forecasts are a work in progress. There is more work ahead of us before this council adopts either a version 2 or version 3 a year from now with the Imagine 2050 plan. Good. Jumping in, a recap of why and how we forecast. Met Council is a planning agency. Regional planning is a forward-looking enterprise, and any good plan, and we have good plans, any good plan is going to include expectations about the future and about conditions related to our planning. So the local forecasts are intended as a statement of most likely outcomes, now to 2050. Where and when are growth expected, how much growth, and again, what is most likely. I'll say there is, since I've been talking with city planners and city managers the last couple of weeks, there is some angst, there is some worry when local forecasts are less than or lower than the full build-out potential of a place. That happens. There can be land supply and capacity that's still unabsorbed within the 2050 horizon. We've never said that this region will be fully developed by 2050. So the more important thing is we are benchmarking our system plans against forecasts. That's what's called for in Chapter 473 of state statutes. And while the local forecasts per se they do not prevent any city from growing as fast as it wants, still systems and services could be limiting. So both we and the cities have some incentive to try to align our expectations around forecasts and around those system and services deployments. We want the most likely outcome. We want in our forecast to represent the most likely outcome, what we expect to have happen between now and 2050. And we're also willing to revise the expectations and the forecasts, and to some extent, system plans during the planning cycle. It doesn't all have to happen in 2025. So at the end of this presentation, I'll come back to more about this dialectic between the local forecasts and local plans, but I will plant a theme now that the Met Council and cities and counties and MnDOT for that matter are all involved together in systems planning, infrastructure provision, services delivery. So we all have a practical outcome and practical objective that regional and local planners are planning for the same future, which means let's also use the same set of forecasts. So the forecast challenge is, how do we know about the future? And there's a hint on this slide. We're providing answers through forecast models. So real-world systems are reduced in model space to just the key components and behaviors, and we work to quantify these. We're turning these into variables, equations, accounting tables, and with all of that fitting together to try to represent how a region changes over the course of decades, how it develops. The systems at issue are complex with multiple dynamics. Things are happening, operating at multiple scales. So, I've been using this slide for years to just illustrate that there is not one super uber model. We have multiple models that we use at Met Council. And I'm just going to list three of these. We have a regional economic model called REMI, R-E-M-I. We use that for forecasting region-level economic activity and migration flows, and forecasting other macro population activity. The middle of the slide here, we have a land use model called Urban Sim Blocks for allocating future land uses, households, and employment to the local level. Whatever we forecasted in the top block here, it's going to be in specific places. And then finally, we have a travel demand model that receives the geographic distribution of where the jobs and people are going to be, and it predicts resulting network conditions. In different contexts, all three of these are called forecast models. The first is a macro level picture of the economy and demographic outcomes. The second of these is where specifically households and population and employment will locate. And then the third forecast addresses traffic loads and mode choice on specific segments or routes of the transportation and transit networks. Forecasts, they're all forecast models. So last April, I presented you our region total forecast. These next couple slides will just be a quick recap. During 2020 to 2050, we expect the Twin Cities Metro to gain 657,000 population, 320,000 households, and employment expands also. Importantly, on this slide, these are all regional totals. These are regional totals and rates. We use the REMI system as our macro model. It does not include a local geographic dimension. It treats the region as a monolith. And the logic there is that industries, businesses, households are making a succession of choices. The choice of what region or metro to site in or live in, that's the first choice. And then in the next part of this presentation, we'll talk about, well, where exactly do they live or site that business? That's the subsequent decision. Here's a different visual of the same forecast. Population growth rates were, double digits in the 1980s and 1990s. Going forward, it's slowing down. You see that the timeline is bending, and it slows down to eventually just 6% per decade. The reasons I covered last year, births and birth rates have slowed. As for migration, I need to be careful how I describe this. There was a divot in the time series at the end of the Trump administration, and then during the years of curtailed immigration because of COVID. But immigration is moving past that now. And having said that, we do expect that immigration remains a major chunk of all this population growth that we're seeing. The outlook is no longer what it was in 2019. That's one of the, that's the blue-colored time series line on this chart. We reduced the expectations of all of those pieces of population growth. We reduced the expectations of births and birth rates, given what we've been seeing the last couple years. We recalculated the international immigration trajectory. We used the Census Bureau's long-range projection of just how many international immigrants there will be, and about 1% of those choosing to live and locating to the Twin Cities region. But it's still, even with those numbers reduced, international immigration is still about half of the Metro's net population growth expectation going forward. This slide's a reminder that we can drill down into the demographic details of the region level growth. We forecast population and workforce by age and race. We forecast households by the size of the household. And each of those dimensions has its own interesting story. On this slide, we are seeing the ballooning of the senior population. The over 65 population, that would be the green series of bars along the bottom. The over 65 population is going to grow by 400,000 persons over 30 years. Meanwhile, the under 65 population, I think that's the gold, the gold series of bars, only grows by 250,000. And this is not a matter of people moving here or not moving here. This is a matter of a really historic rebalancing of the age distribution and people living a lot longer than they did in the 1930s. Well, I went through that fast because it is a recap of what I presented in April. Bringing it all together, this slide is some main ideas. Growth is slowing. It's slower than we previously expected before the pandemic. It's slower than we expected in 2015 when we operationalized the regional development framework. So we have clawed back our forecast accordingly with the most recent data and incorporating other forecast sources. I don't forecast all of this. I do bring in forecasts from other entities that do forecasts. Last thing I'll say on this slide, 2050 will look very different from 2010. I discussed the growing number of older adults. Also, racial and ethnic diversity are burgeoning and expanding in the region and the nation as a whole. The composition of households is changing, and all of these things are going to have implications for activity patterns, transportation, the housing market, workforce trends, and how people spend their time during the day. So now for the transition to new stuff. The regional totals are where we started, but it's not the largest puzzle for us. Our forecasts need to distribute the regional totals to these specific places in the region. So if the region is gaining 320,000 households and hundreds of thousands of jobs, the question is, where will the jobs be sited and where will the households choose to live? Where will developers choose to add new real estate? So to answer that, the last couple of years, we've licensed and implemented, and we had to take it out of the box and assemble it, the Urban Sim Blocks model. And we use this model to handle the projection of location choice behavior, that is how households and employer businesses choose to site where they're going to be, and real estate supply, that is where new housing and businesses will show up. The steps we advance through are a lot of data assembly and data cleaning, then quantitatively identifying and estimating the relationships that matter. And once we have some formulas estimated, and we've tested them to make sure that they actually are predictive, they can explain recent behavior and trends and patterns, it's only then that we take those formulas and we extend the time series out into the future. So our regional forecast has socioeconomic details that I mentioned, age and household size. We can segment all the households into types of households, and different market segments have observable patterns and thus estimable preferences. So considering each group separately, that allows us to model and predict what parts of the market are going to want to site where. And since there's thousands of specific locations in the region, any collection of street blocks could be considered a location. It would be way too much to deal with having customized models for every street corner. So instead, we are representing each location as a set of characteristics. The characteristics being, what's the socioeconomic, historical makeup of the place, its accessibility, how it's spatially close to or far from parks, transit service, employment centers. What's the land values? What does real estate cost? We're looking at all of these characteristics, and we are moneyballing it. We're predicting the probabilities of different market segments' potential to match to sets of location characteristics. And then we're assigning outcomes. So future household locations for each market segment are going to be batch assigned. Specifically, what location and housing characteristics would attract them. And we do the same for employment and industries and their location choices. That was a bit dense. The last aspect of the model that I'll mention, the model does take account of plans and policies and limitations. And these policies, plans, create an envelope of what's possible in a place. So from local governments, we have their allowed land uses, their allowed densities, and these determine the capacity of places. And from Met Council, we have the 2050 wastewater service area, we have the 2050 high-frequency transit network, future highways and arterials network, the projected accessibility, how easy it is to get from any place in the region to any other place in the region. If you read the staff report that accompanied this agenda item, I raised some questions toward the end there, I think on page 2. The main question is, will there be new regional policies that are suggestive of spatial planning guidances or limits that we want to insert to the next version of this model? Because we are going to go back to the drawing board and have a version 2 of this. For example, there's a proposed land use priority. Our committees have been looking at land use priorities for the future. There's a proposed priority of protecting natural habitat and restoring natural systems. And at your direction, we may want to operationalize, are there designated significant ecological areas or criteria for significant ecological areas that need to be preserved beyond what has been preserved in the past? And those would be new considerations. We could turn the knob, so to speak, on what are considered to be local development limits in this model. But that would be new. It's not yet represented in the version 1 preliminary local forecasts. Okay, so now you want to see some results. I'll disclaim again that the results on the next slides are preliminary. As we bring additional considerations into this model, the version 2 forecast will look different from the version 1 results. This slide is year 2020 spatial distribution of households, and Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Bloomington are in the middle of the region. And then this is year 2050 preliminary forecast. And if we flip back and forth, you can see that there is a gain of 320,000 households being distributed. There's infill and intensification in the center of the metro, but there's also an outward push, an outward expansion of the second and third ring suburbs, what we call the developing edge. This next slide is just the simple subtraction difference of the first two slides I showed you. So this is growth. This is 2050 less 2020. And if you're active in Twin Cities development, you can probably identify the specific cities that are hot development locations, have been in the recent decade, and probably will continue to be in the decades coming up. I mentioned already that we're seeing both infill and intensification in the middle, and also outward push and outward expansion of what areas have been developed and urbanized. About 31% of the growth that we expect, I talked about gaining 320,000 households. 31% of that is expected in the urban communities and urban centers. There's 43% share of the growth in the next ring of suburbs, and then 19% of the growth in the emerging suburban edge, and only the smallest share really in those townships that will remain deliberately rural. This slide's a summarization of what I just said. Okay. So let's look at the same sort of map for employment growth. Here's the net employment growth over the 30 years. This is a different pattern because industrial and commercial and office land are only really a small share of all the land in the Twin Cities metro. So employment does concentrate in those places where commercial and office and industrial land are allowed. I think you can also see it's visible that employment clusters or locates along major transportation corridors. Having said that, we're no longer in the year 1950. Time has advanced and economic activity has been continuously suburbanizing over the last 7 decades. There is infill and intensification in the center of the region, but there's also an outward push, an outward expansion into the next couple of rings of suburbs. So on this map, the yellow shaded areas really effectively have no employment growth at all. And the employment growth is headed to the orange and dark shaded areas. Again, these tend to be along major transportation corridors and historical employment centers. This slide is bullet points of what I just said. I do want to caution, models are imperfect. Employment location especially is difficult to project. It's always been more difficult and less robust than the housing forecasts that we do. I think historically the phenomenon that was that regional science really could quantitatively demonstrate is that jobs agglomerate. That's been in the regional science literature, the thing that they could most demonstrably prove. And so in past modeling that Met Council has done, Met Council has been forecasting employment growth and population growth for the last 5 decades. In a lot of those forecast sets, the historical forecasts, I think we did tend to over-represent that employment agglomeration with employment showing up at the places where it's always been. And in recent decades, I think we've been, it's become more clear that those forecasts were flawed in that sense. The models couldn't imagine that employment would be moving outward. So there is more of a change in the employment pattern as we move from the Thrive forecasts to the Imagine 2050 forecasts. The last bullet on this slide says that we're making an 8-point shift in the share of employment growth that we expect to be in the urban communities and urban centers and urban core. And that's actually a pretty big change. We were attentive to this need for the new forecast model to be anticipating and projecting that employment growth has moved outward in every decade. It will continue to do so. So we did take steps to ensure that, as it turns out, in this forecast set, 60% of the net growth is outside of the urban centers and urban communities. And if you want to know specifically, well, there's this map. Right. So let's move to the last part of this presentation, the last section of the slides. We wrapped up version 1 modeling in December. We vetted a set of forecasts with our internal sector reps and system planners. And in January, we published a preliminary forecast set to the council's website. We communicated to city managers with our local governments and city planners that this was published. They could look at it, they could comment on it. It's, this slide is describing the product. It's the most modest product, really. It's just the city and town level results. It's just the population, households, and employment. Later in our process, months from now, we will have forecast products that split the metro more granularly into 2,500 sub-city transportation analysis zones. And that's a lot more geographies than just the 185 cities and townships and places. It's 2,500 transportation zones. But we're not ready for that. That comes later. This is a timeline for the refresh of our local forecasts. I think this conveys that, yeah, we are still early in the process. Along with the forecast set that's now on our website, we also shared more spatially detailed data sets internally with system planners in transportation and transit and wastewater capital planning and water supply analysis. They have that set of forecasts, and we've invited them to take the preliminary version 1 forecast set, load these into the several downstream models that all of our divisions use for their respective systems. And in the coming weeks, hopefully March or April, I'll be hearing back from our system planners what they learned about wastewater system capacity and about loads and accessibility on the transportation network, and so on. And then our local forecast team and research will take those results and refresh the urban SIM blocks model, and we'll progress into the version 2 work. And version 2 will culminate with a set of proposed local forecasts, should be ready in August. We'll publish that with the same public hearing timeline as the Imagine 2050 development guide. And all of this then moves forward with the same timeline. You'll be approving the local forecasts as part of the Imagine 2050 development guide a year from now. If it's not clear already, there will be subsequent versions of this local forecast set. And my hope is these won't be vastly, drastically different. The revisions will be progressively smaller as we progress to a version 2 and maybe a version 3. This slide is the headline differences between versions 1 and 2. Version 1 doesn't yet reflect the full set of known and proposed developments that have happened since year 2020. It doesn't yet reflect transportation model results that are now being worked on. Doesn't yet reflect anything for water supply analysis or any new regional policies. So it's really fairly stripped down. But by August, we're hoping to have some of this. Load that into the model space, create a version 2 proposed local forecasts. And that proposed set of local forecasts will introduce those new system characteristics. It will also introduce any new regional policies or implications for spatial planning that come out of your deliberations and decisions over the next couple months. Council staff are asking your direction on what things will be new and what things we prioritize. Well, this is another timeline. I'll say we're willing to consider the alternatives that local governments and their publics are bringing to us And what comes out of the model is not the end of the story. We can override and replace the model results if warranted, if there's good reason to. We do have this schedule for when we'd be ready to discuss post-modeling adjustments. After we're done with modeling, we can discuss with cities and towns, are there new considerations, maybe major changes to their local plans that would warrant something different happening with the forecast for a specific community or township. Like I said, I created this slide to answer some local government questions that have come up the past month. Question was, when can they review and comment, and do their comments make a difference? And the answer is we're never really done with this. That's what this timeline is telling you. There are multiple opportunities for local governments to alert us to something new in their community and the need to change local forecasts. And that'll be the case all the way through the next planning cycle. As you're aware, at these council meetings you have every 2 weeks, there's often plan amendments that include a city request to change forecasts. I think you saw that most recently with Brooklyn Park. What's important to us is Met Council and local planners ultimately working from the same expectations about the future. And we do practice communicative planning. In the area of forecasts, we are flexible about revisiting and revising these. And it's not because we're uncertain, it's an acknowledgement that the future really is conditioned by our plans. If plans change, maybe the forecasts need to change as well. Over the last 5 weeks, we've invited city managers and city planners to look at the preliminary forecasts. It's been publicly visible. It's on our public website. I've also shared with those audiences, city planners and city managers, my wish list of data that would be really informative if we can get it from them. So at the bottom of this slide, I list some things that actually could move the needle if there are. We have talked with city planners who asked, what information would you need to convince you that the forecast needs to be higher or lower in a given city? We are still taking comments for the rest of this month, which I guess is tomorrow, from city managers and city planners. Thus far, I think we've heard from 22 cities, and it's the mix that you'd expect. There's 3 city planners who indicated satisfaction. They like what we came up with. There's 5 that wanted their city's forecasts lower in some respect, either employment or households. And there's 9 that wanted their city's forecasts higher in some respect. And there's 5 more that asked questions or expressed interest, but they haven't really taken a position. Well, a few final notes. The local forecasts are fully an authority and responsibility of Met Council, you. So we don't necessarily, I wouldn't call it negotiate with local governments. Instead, they request their expectations or preferences, and if it's well-reasoned, supported by plans or analysis, et cetera, then we take that into account. In specific cases, I guess we do negotiate with local governments if the forecast issues are critically intertwined with infrastructure or system issues. And some cities that have commented the past couple of weeks have brought up those kinds of issues. There's one city that recently, used to be a township, recently incorporated. They're now talking about wanting a municipal wastewater system. They have an agreement with the neighboring city for all of this to work for them, for it to work as a municipal system. They feel like they really need to ramp up quickly and get a critical volume of new households that would then be customers for that municipal utility. So that's the kind of situation where we would talk with the city, come to some agreements, probably it has bearing on the local forecasts. Last two things I'll say, the local forecasts are a statement of what we think is the likely future, now to 2050. The forecasts can be less than the full build-out of what could happen in a place. There can be land supply and capacity that are unabsorbed within the 2050 horizon. That's just a reality. I think that ends up being a tension, especially on the developing edge, as we're talking with emerging developing edge communities and with rural centers. And the local forecast set itself, it doesn't prevent any places from developing or growing. But the local forecast, as I said at the top of the presentation, it is a guide for how we're rolling out our systems and services. Those could be a limiting factor. And so in that sense, the forecasts and what we're doing with regional systems, those are intertwined, and that often occasions the need for some discussion. In a way, the local forecasts, as we're publishing these, are a pretty good reminder and prompt for the local governments to bring up these issues with us. Mr. Chairman, that's the presentation. I can answer questions the council has.
Thank you so much, Todd. Questions? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this excellent report. I just really appreciate your analysis and have a lot of confidence in what you're doing. A couple of, and I can see the work, I'm looking at Chair Carter over there for our 2050 Guide Plan Work Group, because I can see some of the things we're talking about showing up in this piece here. So that is interesting as well, how it's all coming together. So a couple of questions. As it relates to spatial limits, you mentioned preserved natural areas. Would that also potentially be like restoring areas as well? Preservation and restoration?
Yeah, natural systems restoration is outside of my expertise. Where I come into it is if we can figure out what pieces of land don't have development and we want to keep development off of those pieces of land, we can represent that in the model. We can call that limits, no new development in these places, or limit the numbers in those places. So that's what gets entered to the model that I project manage. The actual restoration of that would be a different division and probably would be, might not even be Met Council. It might be the county or the cities.
Thank you. That answers my questions, and I'm seeing Director Barajas back there too, nodding, so thank you for that. Well, just one other thing I wanted to ask, because I do like this process, and I think you're being very inclusive in all of that. I think you had said you mentioned 23 cities had given feedback, and you kind of gave us the breakdown of the types of feedback you were giving. Was that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I know it's been posted, and certainly cities are, I think, usually waiting with bated breath to see where their city's going to land and all of that. So these 23 cities, were they ones that we actively work with on a regular basis? Did we recruit and go into proactively approach these cities? Did they just kind of show up? And are these 23 cities out of the many, many cities that we represent, are they dispersed geographically fairly well, and also with urban versus, suburban edge versus rural versus fully developed, little nodes of communities? Is that a good representation in the 23?
Mr. Chairman and Councilmember Johnson, it sort of feels a little bit random. We communicated with all of the city managers and city planners that are on our mailing lists.
Great.
And it probably would have been overwhelming if all of them had responded, but
Right.
but two dozen
They wait.
Two dozen
Another
of them
day.
made the choice to respond.
Okay.
And those, some of them are what we'd call urban communities, some of them are suburban edge, some of them are rural centers. I think there maybe is a little bit more debate when we get into the rural centers. There's only so much growth in the region, and it becomes a pie-cutting exercise. And some of the communities that have commented are really, I would say, far off the main road. Also, we had some comments from cities around the White Bear Lake Shed, which is its own issue. We made the choice after the modeling process to not raise the forecasts for any of the communities that currently have court cases in the district court against the DNR. So I would say we're signaling that we're reserving judgment on those. We did not raise the forecasts for any of those. In a couple cases, we reduced the forecasts. And in a couple cases, the result looks, that decision that we made to override our forecast model ends up with some sort of wacky-looking time series. For example, there is a city that has already exceeded its Thrive 2040 forecast. And we're just showing that city as being flat. We do want to come back to that set of cities around the White Bear Lake Shed and actually have some real forecasts in version 2. But I think our Environmental Services Division and also the rest of our planners are looking forward to having a little bit more clarity from DNR and the courts in those cities about what is going on with the future regime of development.
And Mr. Chair, just one final. Sure. And through this process, I remember back in the day, there might have even been some sort of an open house, or maybe there was a road show. I don't even know how, because there's a lot of cities that are going to be actively, I would assume, engaged in this, and hopefully you've got enough resources and people at the council to manage through some of this. So I appreciate this process. I appreciate your expertise. I look forward to seeing where it goes. And I also just appreciate, especially with the analysis of where jobs are going to be landing and the shifts that are taking place, that it's showing up in this. And honestly, when you look at the map, I don't think it's real surprising for any of us because it's happening. Yes. But to see how it will impact our systems, of course, is key. So just thank you. I really appreciate the presentation and, again, have a lot of faith in what you're doing.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cedarburg, you had your hand up.
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question on the urban sim model, because that's really what's going to end up driving a lot of your local results. And based on my experience, 30 years of modeling from macro to micro, modeling is a science and it's an art, and I can appreciate that. And so I appreciate you doing this in an iterative process. I was just wondering if you had any surprises from the urban sim model that just kind of like, that doesn't make sense, or because you're actually looking at kind of real estate projections. And I'm thinking of St. Paul, Minneapolis, where, there's a lot of empty buildings and, the jobs aren't there. And did you get any kind of aha moment from looking at it going, that just doesn't make sense as to what they're projecting for St. Paul and Minneapolis, or based on the trends of the last couple of years? Or did you go back 5 years post-pandemic to kind of get your time series? So I'm wondering what your time series was, if it's just the last 2 years or not, and how that time series affects the results, because that is going to be your big driver.
Chair Zelli and Councilmember Cedarburg, there have been a lot of surprises during the development of this, and we've run the model literally dozens of times. And I think the model that the results set that we ended up with was like version number 186 or something like that. So things that I've already remarked on, employment forecasts are very difficult, and massive time series disruption that happened in 2020 really didn't help us much. Right. It ended up being a confounding kind of thing. A second thing that I'll remark on is yes, the model is being trained on what has happened the last 12 or 13 years, and specifically the past decade. And so there is a calibration step to neaten up everything and just doubly ensure that future trajectories, the way the line looks on a graph, that those trajectories are in line with what we've seen the last 12 years or 13 years. And there is a flaw, there's a logical flaw to all this because development doesn't always move neatly in a line. It's actually very up and down and episodic. And one of the cities that reached out and had comments is a city in the East Metro where very little development occurred from 2010 to 2020. And then in the space of like 3 years after the pandemic, all sorts of development has taken off. Our model wouldn't have seen that. So I readily concede that we're probably under forecasting that community. We want to go back and make correction in the next round of work.
So just a follow-up question. Did you do a time series? Did you just look at the last couple years of data and just do a projection to say, because 10 years based on the pandemic, and if you basically say things are going to happen like they've been growing post-pandemic, what would that look like and how different would that be? I guess I'd be very curious at looking at that. People aren't having to go into the cities to work. They can work. I know, people are working different places. People are starting to build businesses outside the inner city. And I was just really curious to see just how different that would look and if that would have captured. I'm District 11, District 12, so we're East Metro, so we know what's happening in Washington County and the East, whether that would have captured that or not, if it had looked very different.
Yeah, Chair Zelli and Councilmember Cedarberg, our time series was pre-pandemic, really ending around 2020.
Right.
So we've missed some of what has happened since then. And again, the employment piece was very difficult. We, at the beginning of this process, we had some ideas of maybe redefining how employment is, well, redefining what is counted as employment. That ended up not being something we could do. We continue to use the historical definition of how employment is counted, which is consistent with the time series for the last 80 years. It does not capture the employment data that we get from Bureau of Labor Statistics and from Minnesota DEED does not provide us any insight on what number of the jobs are at physical traditional work sites and what number are work from home or remote or mobile. We don't know. Bureau of Labor Statistics doesn't track that, so we continue to use the traditional concept of counting jobs at the place where the payroll department reports the jobs are located. This is admittedly a little bit old-fashioned and more so an issue after we went from 5% of the workforce working from home to a quarter of the workforce working from home.
If we think long-term, this might be something that could be developed over the years because it may be the new reality, and I think that's your point, Councilman. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sort of a general comment almost for all of you. And first of all, thank you, Todd. And do want to, one of the feedback that I've gotten from the communities I represent from the last cycle of this, well, I joined council about the last time we started doing this. I think one of the first things that was the approved local forecast. And is that if you look over a decade's time, our forecasts are really good. And there might be some of this in between, but usually over the long term, we're kind of in the right realm. One thing I highly recommend for my council members, fellow council members, is this time of the preliminary versus approved. Like I've already had a couple of communities reach out, because as Todd was mentioning, some people think they're going to grow a lot faster. Some people think they're not going to grow as much. And so now is the time to have this discussion. So this is a great touch point to reach out to communities, to talk to some of them, because it's really Yes, we're developing the regional development guide and the system plans, but this is the local piece of it that informs your comp plan. So it's a great chance to get sort of that connection with the communities, find out what's happening on a local level, because we might see like the trends overall, but like, as was mentioned, you might not know about development A, B, or C in a particular town at a particular moment. And all of that can get fed into this, but it's just a great way to really kind of learn what's happening in your local communities and then help feed it back into community development, into Todd's program and all of that. So.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, thoughts? Councilmember Vento.
I have a weird, I don't know if it's a question or a thought, or I should even say it out loud, but I was having a conversation.
You have permission to. My permission.
Oh, good. You may regret that. I was having a conversation recently with a very successful retired HR person, and we were talking about the combination of the aging population and the pandemic, and the impact it's having on employment and how people are employed, and the bargaining chips that they've got in terms of, okay, I don't want to go into the office every day of the week, so Ms. or Mr. Boss, I want to work at least part-time from home. And they've got them over the barrel. But, you know, based on all of what we've discussed tonight, including the comments at the beginning of our session tonight during the public comment period, I think we, as a council, really want to think about our future employment as it relates to the aging population and the impact of the pandemic, and if and how we recruit older people to employment here, because the needs are going to be different. The expectations or the ability, you know, the time element is going to be different. And sometimes when whether we're dealing with individuals or bargaining units, it's really hard to anticipate what that's going to be. So I think we really have to have a listening ear as it relates to that as an employer, as well as a listening ear to that as it relates to working with our townships and our communities, because it's going to be tough.
As a fellow elderly member of the council, you're singing my song.
I won't take that as an offense, Mr. Chair.
No, not at all. It's a great place to be. I do think, following up on what Councilmember Vento said, that this trend of a workforce shortage started way before the pandemic.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
and that's something that we need to
Silver tsunami.
keep right. We need to be mindful of. Yeah.
Well, if I could just add to that, this wonderful individual said, I can remember going to conferences 30 years ago, and they were talking about how 2020, that's the year. She said, I can see the PowerPoint presentations, and they were looking at the projections for 2020.
And I think as talented as Todd is, when it comes to arithmetic, it's pretty accurate that what's going to happen over the years when we look at existing populations.
Well,
Any other
Mr. Chair
comments?
and Councilmember Vento, it actually, the secret of demography is you just need to look 18 years back at the number of kids being born, and now you know the number of adults 18 years hence. So it moves slowly like an iceberg. It moves at a glacial pace, and it's very certain. There are other things in the future landscape that are not like that at all. There are other things that are very sudden and drastic, but changes in the demographic makeup more predictable.
Yeah. Dr. Carter.
Yeah, I had a question. We're projected to be one of the climate refuge areas in terms of global warming. And how does that factor in, or how do you guys look at that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Carter, still trying to figure that out is the short answer. We have looked at other forecasters' work. There's a forecaster at Florida State University that has done long-range migration projections in response to sea level rise, which mainly ends up affecting, in the United States, coastal areas, places like Florida, His findings and his published data sets show that if there are climate refugees from Florida, those climate refugees tend to move as short a distance as they can get away with, as short a distance as they can imagine, as they can manage. So rising sea levels in Florida ends up being a big population boost to Atlanta or to Texas, not so much to Minnesota. But I have not yet found, and I still look for, are there forecast sets like that that are responsive to not just sea level rise, but also temperature shifts, climate shifts, and there's not a lot of work out there, but we're still looking.
Any other comments? No. Well, Todd, thank you so much. I think you've heard a great sense of appreciation from our parts. Really important work, and clearly, as we think about the regional guide, we're marching forward. This is very much part of that whole process. So we have a big year ahead, and we look forward to the next round. So with that, I have no reports. Sitting on my right is the person sitting in as regional administrator, but it's actually our new chief financial officer, Ned Smith. Thank you. Well, you're in transition, but any reports?
No reports from the acting regional administrator, no, sir.
Okay. Thank you. And our general counsel, chief counsel.
Yes, thank you. Along with our Chief Human Resources Officer, I had the opportunity last Thursday to participate in the Great Week in Transit, and we rode the Green Line after work. And one of the feedback that I got was from a rider who said that he likes to see and would like to see more of our council members on the trains and our executives. And I told him that I would bring that message back, that that's one of the things that he appreciates seeing. I had not been able to participate in that before, and I really appreciated the opportunity to be out there as an ambassador and talk to our riders and really figure out what our colleagues in Metro Transit are experiencing, and be able to take feedback back to them. So I really enjoyed it. I'll be doing it again, but I just appreciated the opportunity. And I really appreciate Metro Transit and everything that they do. We might have gotten on the wrong train coming back. Just for a little bit, when we heard Mall of America, we were like, oh, that's not where we're supposed to be going. We're trying to go to St. Paul. So we ended up with another Metro Transit worker on the way back. And like so many of our Metro Transit colleagues, he has adopted a bus stop. And that is always really remarkable to me, how many of our Metro Transit and our council workers adopt bus stops and platforms and really walk the walk. So I appreciate that, and I wanted to share that. Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for those comments. And also, thank you to all council members who have participated in supporting transit by riding along and being an ambassador. We are all ambassadors. I know when I've done it, it's been exhilarating, and you learn a lot. You learn a lot, not just from customers, but you learn a lot from those transit employees who are not shy coming up and saying hello. With that, leap year, enjoy tomorrow, and one more day in the month, and this meeting's adjourned.